where we were last week, and we're going to pick up from last week and move forward in this wonderful book. And many times, we in this present day time, there's a saying that we use so often, but many a times we don't know the extent of what we're saying when we use it. We say, bless the Lord, oh my soul, bless his holy name. And when I think about that, when we say, bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name, we are asking God to take over the house that we dwell in. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that dwell within me. Everything that I got, God, within me, we are asking you to bless our souls. We're asking you to give us the strength to be able to fight against the wiles of the devil. And I'm saying that tonight for a reason, because we're coming back from last week to our topic again. And we know that many times when we're trying to do right by God, evil is always present. And last week our topic was, and it is again tonight, that at the height of our worship, here comes the devil. At the height of our worship, our relationship with God, at the very peak of us doing good and being who God called us to be, the devil don't mind us reaching those peaks, because he's always coming in and trying to do the thing to knock our feet from up under us, to get us disencouraged as to who we are in the Lord and what we're trying to stand for. But any time that you stand for God, I tell you tonight, the devil's always going to try to come in and make us walk away from our conviction that we had given to God in our life, that we would serve him all the days of our life. And as I was looking at this and looking at this awesome man of God by the name of Job, we're going to go back tonight just real quickly and look at chapter 1 to see what was going on in the scene. And if you will, allow me just to read just a little bit of chapter 1, and we'll go forward. The Bible said here in verse 1 in chapter 1, the book of Job, that there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man is getting ready to describe who he was. It said, and that man was upright and one that feared God, one that reverenced God. He was upright and one that feared God and eschewed evil, because Job feared God. Because, and fear here means he respected God. He honored God. And because he honored God, he eschewed evil. He stayed away from evil things. He kept himself pure. He kept himself away from doing things that was against the will of God. He eschewed evil. And as I was looking at that, we know that it tells all that Job had. He was the richest man in the land. The Lord had blessed him with 10 children, 7 sons, and 3 daughters. And one day, God was having a meeting with his son, and old Satan showed up. And God said in verse 6, if you will, it said, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, where are you coming from, Satan? Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Lord, I've been going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? Look what God calls Job. He says, Satan, I know you've been seeking somebody that you can deceive and devour, but have you tried my servant? And can I put a pin there tonight? Because when the Lord calls you a servant, that means that you have been walking with him. That means that you are somebody that God respects. And God pulled Job out of anybody else that he could have pulled out at that time. He pulled Job out. That lets us know that Job must have favor with God. He must have been walking with God the way that God has respect unto Job. And look what God tells Satan here. Let's go down to verse 8, if you will. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? And there's none like him in the earth. That he said, there ain't nobody in the earth like this man called Job. A perfect and upright man, one that feared God and eschewed evil. And look what Satan said. After God gave Satan Job's resume. And after God got through telling Satan who Job was, look what Satan said in verse 9. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, do Job fear God for nothing? Has not thou had put a hedge about him in his house? He said, Lord, you got a hedge around Job, so trouble can't come his way. He said, now, if you take the hedge away from around him, I'll make him curse you to your face. Let me go on down to verse 10, if you will. He has not thou made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that everything that he had on every side. You got him blocked in where no trouble can't come in. But ain't that a good place to be when you've been so right with God that God will put a fence around you, that trouble can't get into you? And I looked at this in verse 11, if you will, and it said, but put forth thou hand now and touch all that he had. Touch the material things, the luxuries that you have given him. Put forth your hand and touch it now and see when he curse you to your face. Look at verse 11. But put forth thou hand now and touch all that he had, and he will curse thee to thy face. Now, can I put a pin here tonight and go back to the topic real quick? Because when we think about Job, at the height of his worship, here comes the devil. And many a times when we have come to a level with God and we may be at the height of our worship, don't get so relaxed to think and to believe that trouble can't come our way. I went down to verse 12, and the Bible said here in verse 12, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he had is in our power. He says, Satan, the only thing that you cannot do unto him is to kill him. He said you can do anything else that you want to do. I went down to verse 13 and said, there was a day when his sons and daughters was eating in the house, in the eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job. Now, just right after Job got through blessing the name of the Lord and said the oxen were plowing in the field and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. And they have sinned, they have slain our servants with the sword, with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And as soon as the first servant came and told Job what was happening, another one came. Seemed like trouble back to back came to Job suddenly. In verse 17, he said, while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away. Yea, slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped to tell thee. And the Bible says again, and then while one is giving, the second man is giving Job bad news, here comes another one and come to tell Job about his children. That all his children was in the eldest brother's house. And they was having dinner in verse 18. And while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters was eating and drinking wine in thy eldest son's house, and their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind, wind from the wilderness, and spoke the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and only I am escaped to tell thee. But look what happened in verse 20. And then Job arose after all this bad news, after finding out that all his children had been destroyed, that all his children are dead. And Job decided to make a conscious decision When we get bad news, we won't have to learn how to make a conscious decision in which direction we're going to go from here on out. And look what Job said after getting this bad news that, all his children are dead. In verse 20, Job arose and rent his mantle. In other words, he tore his robe and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground. And the Bible said he worshiped God. In other words, after getting all this bad news, Job prepared himself for worship. He shaved his head, got down on the ground. He rent his mantle, and fell down on the ground, and he worshiped God. And what I'm saying tonight, many times at the height of our worship, when things are going good with the relationship that we have with God, Satan will show up and try to make us bend down on our knees unto him. But Job chose not to bend down his knees to Satan, but he bent down his knees to the Lord and decided to go ahead and worship God anyhow. And when I was looking at this, I went down a little bit further, if you will. Excuse me for going so fast, but I'm trying to get us back to the new lesson tonight. I just wanted to give us a insight on what was going on in last week's lesson to get to the point where we are tonight. And as I was looking at this, look what Job said in verse 21. And said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Job said, blessed be the name of the Lord. This is at the peak of Job's relationship with God. And instead of Job getting angry with God when things started to happen unto him, and these weren't no little things, all his children was gone. And Job still decided to worship God. And then I went down, if you will, he said, bless the name of the Lord. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And the Bible says in verse 2, in all this, Job sinned not, neither charged he God foolishly. In other words, he didn't get out of line with God, but Job chose to go ahead and worship God. He didn't charge God and say, Lord, this is your fault. Why you let this happen and why you let that happen? But Job said, I know I've been good to you, God, but I'm going to choose not to complain. I'm going to choose to worship. And many times that's what we have to do when these things befall us in our life. When bad news comes, we got to make a choice. Are we going to continue to worship God? Or are we going to start complaining to God about where we are and the circumstances that we're in? Because don't you know, God already know where we are. He already know what has happened even before it happened. But God allowed these things to come to prove us as to are we who we said that we are. I went down to chapter 2, which brings us into the lesson tonight. And as I got down to chapter 2, I noticed something in the text that after all this had happened, Job in chapter 1 didn't charge God foolishly. And now in chapter 2, after Job going through the first assault and look at everything that he lost, the devil comes back again. This is the second assault on Job. Now you would think that Job done had enough from the first assault, losing all his children, all his family, all his kids. But look here in verse chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. Now God had a meeting with his son. And here come old devil showing up. And Satan came also among them to present himself unto the Lord. And look what God said unto Satan. And the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And we know what he was doing. And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none like him in all the earth. Now somebody said, well, why would God allow Satan to come back and attack Job again? Job already showed himself faithful unto God. Well, why would God allow Satan to come and have a second attack on Job? See, many times we have to understand that the stronger that we are in God and the things that we try to do in his holy name, God, he'll prove us out to see are we who we said that we are. Now, he already knew the heart of Job, and he knew what Job would do. So that's why God comes again and said, look, this man here is more than you think he is, say. And I went down to verse 2, and the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro, up and down in the earth, walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant, Job, at the height of our worship? Here comes the devil, a perfect and upright man, one that feared God and eschewed evil, and still hold it fast to his integrity. Can we put a pin there tonight? Look how God alludes to what has happened to Job already. This is the Lord is talking. He asking Satan, have you considered my servant Job, who still hold fast to his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy me without cause, to destroy him without cause. Now the God says, say, you already moved against me to destroy this righteous man without cause. And here he is again. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yea, all that a man had will he give for his life. He said, now you took away some valuable things from Job when it came to his family and when it came to his cattle and stock and everything else that he had. You took some valuable things away from him. But he said, now when it comes to Job himself, if you let me touch him, I guarantee you I'll make it curse you to your face. I went down to verse 4 again in chapter 2, and Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. All that a man have will he give for his own life. But put forth thou hand now, Lord, and touch his bone and his flesh. He will curse thee to thy face. And look what the Lord said in verse 6 in chapter 2. The Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thy hand, but his life must be saved. You can take everything that he has. You can do anything that you want to do with him, but you can't kill him. And then look at verse 7 says, so Satan went forth to present himself. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and spoke Job with sore bores from the sole of his foot unto the crown of his head. He attacked him physically. He put bores on it, blisters all over Job. And here Job is from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet. Satan says, surely if I do this to him, if I touch his physical being, he's going to curse God for me. But when I went to verse 8, look what it said. And he took him a potsherd and scraped himself with it. In other words, when the blisters came on Job, Job broke a pot and he took the edge of the sharp part of the pot. He didn't complain. He just started to busting the blisters that the Satan had brought upon him. And then while he was yet doing that, and he sat down among the ashes, then said his wife unto him. Now, look how Satan do. When you still trying to worship God, when you're in a place where you don't feel like you done lost everything, and instead of complaining, you just blushing the blisters that's on you, and still trying to be faithful to God. Then, because Satan couldn't get to Job, he went to somebody that was close to him. I gotta put a pin here tonight, because when we think about relationships and what have you, and when somebody see us going through, somebody, they may love us dearly, and they see us going through, and it seems like it ain't no hope in their eyes that we're gonna make it. And some folk will just tell you, just go ahead and rest yourself. Just go ahead and give up on God. But don't you know, Job said, I can't do it because I know God is my redeemer. And I looked at that in verse 9 and said, then said his wife unto him, dost thou not still retain thy integrity? Curse God and die. But look at verse 10. But he said unto her, thou speakest as a foolish woman speaketh. What shall we receive good at the hand of God always? and never receive evil. Job decided to stand for what God stands for. And instead of criticizing God, Job decided to still worship God and to praise God. And look what Job said here in verse 10 again. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What shall we have good at the hand of the Lord, and not evil? And all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now, I underline this in my Bible. Because the first thing that we do, we sin with our mouth. His wife told Job to go ahead and curse God. But Job decided, instead of cursing God, I'm going to bless his holy name. And when we're going through things like this, the devil wants us to turn our back on God. He wants us to curse God and go ahead and walk away from God. But Job said, I know my Redeemer liveth. And everything that has happened to me, he said, I know God still has the power to turn it around. Somebody online tonight getting ready to throw the towel in. And God said, don't you know I'm still the same God that gave you everything? And even though I allow Satan to take it away, I'm still the God that can bless you with not only what you had, but give you more than what you ever will hope for. So when I was looking at this, we gotta know that our relationship with God. And if we do what God tells us to do, if we follow him faithfully, we gotta know that God is a redeemer. He can give us back everything that we lost and then some on top. I kept looking at this when I went down to verse 10 again. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of a foolish woman speaking. I'm not going to curse God. What shall we receive good at the hand of God? Shall not we receive evil? And all this did Job sin not with his lips. And I underline lips in my Bible again. All of this, Job chose to put his hand over his mouth. And all of this. And what I'm saying tonight, we got to learn how to put our hands over our mouth sometimes. When we have a right, seem like, to go ahead and go toe to toe with somebody because they done got on our last nerve, or they done did something tragically to us. And instead of us cursing them, we decide not to say anything to them. We decide to go ahead and bless the Lord for the state that we're in. And I went down to verse 11, if you will. Now, with all this going on, Job had some good friends that came to see about it. They heard what Job had gone through. They heard the loss that Job had. And Job's friends arrived to sit with Job. In verse 11 in chapter 2, it said, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him. Now, y'all know how bad news travel. He said when they heard what had happened to Job, Job's friends came to see about Job. In verse 11 again, and when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Neamatite. For they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. Now, these friends had good intentions when they came to see about Job. They made an appointed time in their life to go and to see about their friend. And when I got down to verse 12, and it said, when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voices and they began to cry and to weep. And they rent every one of them their mantle and sprinkled dust upon their head toward heaven. When they seen the condition that Job was in, they said, oh my God, what has happened to you, man? And they throw ashes in the air as a sign of this is a tragedy that is going on in this man's life. I went down to verse 13, if you will, and it says, so they sat down with him upon the ground. Now, after being there for a while, they sat down with Job upon the ground. 7 days and 7 nights, and none spoke a word unto him, for they saw his grief was very heavy. And sometimes when we see somebody that's going through something like that, sometimes it's best not to say anything, but just to be there for them and to be there with them. They didn't ask Job no questions as to what have you did to deserve this. They were just there as being friends. But when I got down to chapter 3, in verse 1, look what Job said here. Job lets us know how bad it hurts and what was going on to him, what had happened to him. He let them know how he was feeling, the hurt that had been brought upon him. Chapter 3, verse 1. After this opened Job his mouth and cursed the day. And Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man child conceived. When Job did finally open his mouth and saying how hurt he was and what was going on in his life, Job said again, let the day perish wherein I was born. He said, I just want to go ahead and close the door, sing loud. And the night in which it was said, there is a man child conceived. And so before I came out of my mother's womb, he said, even when it was spoken that I was conceived in my mother's womb, he said, if you could just wipe the slate clean. But look what it says when you're going down past that in verse 4. It said, let that day be darkness, and let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. It says, just go ahead and wipe me off, erase me, that I've never been there, like I've never been there before. But when I got down to verse 5, it said, let darkness and the shadow thereof stain it. Let a cold dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. And let not be joined unto the day of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. In other words, Job said, just go ahead and wipe me off the calendar like I never been born. Now, this is a state of mind that Job had allowed himself to come into. He was sorrow in heart for what had happened unto his children. And then, but look what I get down to verse 7. It said, let not the night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to rise up their morning. So even when the mornings come, it's curse the day. I went on down, and I got to say this part because this is very important. Job was human. He was a human person. He took a lot of stuff. And went on down to verse 9. He said, let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eye. In other words, Job said, I was trying to do good, and evil got in my way. And Job said, from my mother's womb, I wish I hadn't been born. It goes on down. It's hide not nor the sorrow from my eyes. Verse 11. Why did I not from the womb? Why died I not from the womb? Now, can we put a pin here tonight? Job is even questioning now his birth. Why did I die from the womb? It's all this had to happen unto me. Lord, why was I even born? Why would I have to go through these things? Can I put a pin here tonight? We are born with purpose. And sometimes when things happen in our life, we question the day that God allowed us to be here. We question, Lord, why would you give me all of this and then turn around and take it away? And then, Lord, I can't find nothing that I done wrong. I can't find where I turned my back on you. And Job was having a normal human situation. He was having a normal human a pity party. But when I kept reading on down in verse 11 again, why died I not from my mother's womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did darkness prevent me? Why didn't darkness prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? Why was I even able to feed off my mother's breast that I became a child and then a grown man? Went down to verse 13. He said, for now should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept. Then had I been at rest. I would have been saved from pain if I had died at birth. Job is letting us know how bad this felt, the thing that was allowed to happen unto him. That's the human aspect of Job. But then I kept reading on down a little bit further. He said in verse 14, with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolated places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as a hidden, untimely birth, I had not been, as infants which never saw life. He's still talking about, even when I was born, I should have been born, still born, what Job would say. But here we go in verse 17. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. Lord, if I had died, I wouldn't have no more trouble. I would be at rest from the things that you allowed to happen unto me. But then verse 13, there's the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. He said, they're in the grave. I hear not a thing. Why you let all this happen to me and I didn't die? Can I put a pin here tonight? God will let severe things happen unto us in this life and then cause it to put us in a place that we don't die. We there and we still feel the sorrow, the pain, the anguish. We go through things and wonder, Lord, why you allowed this to happen unto me? But when I kept reading Job's story, I found out more about the man of God. I found out more about the man of Job. I went on down to verse 20. It said, wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul, which longeth for death, but cometh not, and dig for it more than hid treasure. Job said, I'm digging for the grave more than I'm digging for hidden treasure. He said, I just want somebody to bury me and cover me up. Job now is having a pity party in a sense. Y'all know how we do. It seems like things, it just won't work out for us. But I thank God when Job was just talking among himself and to God and asking God these questions, why this and why that. Job still didn't sin not. He was just asking God some questions. Lord, what did I do wrong? Well, what happened that caused me to have to go through this? And I went down to verse 22, if you will, which said, rejoice exceedingly and glad when they can find the grave. Why is light given to man, whose way is hid, and whom God had hedged in? He said, Lord, you had a fence around me. I didn't realize what pain was until you took it away. I didn't realize what suffering was until you took it away. I went down to verse 24, and it said, for my sighing come before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the water. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me. Can we put a pin here tonight? Job said, I knew I was in good shape. And I always thought about what would happen if bad things started to happen to me. what my reaction would be. Verse 24, for my sign come before me, and before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the water. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, that which I was afraid of is come unto me. Now, can I put a pin here for a minute? If y'all will. You ask yourself the question, when all this is happening in our lives, when things start to going bad and we having this pity party like Job was having, then we ask ourselves the question, now, what am I going to do? I'm still here. I'm still alive. What am I going to do now in the situation that God has allowed me to be in? I went down to verse 26. He said, I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet. Yet trouble came. In other words, Job is saying, I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and still trouble came. Somebody online tonight been doing what you're supposed to been doing, and still God allowed trouble to come. And we get so comfortable and resting in one side of life when things is going good that we lose track that even in the bad, God is still good. And what I'm saying tonight is that we ain't never had anything bad happen to us. How will we ever fully appreciate the good thing that God has allowed us to see and that God has allowed us to live in? That's why Job's friends was attacking, saying to him, man, you done had it good all this time. Why sit here in a pity party? We're going to sit here and we ain't going to sit nothing. We're going to sit here. But think about what God has done. I went down, if you will, to chapter 4. But let me know when our time is getting away from us. Okay. We got time short. It run out tonight. It ran out on us. This story with Job, and let me just say it like this. We're gonna have to come back because when I still look at Job, and Job was human. Job was a good man and an upright man, but he still had human feelings and human sorrow. And Job knew what pain felt like. And Job had the opportunity now to experience what loss feel like. And many times God will allow us to experience these things in our life, not to destroy us, but to make us who he would have us to be, and to make us stronger in the areas that we need to grow. If we never had any pain or anything bad happen to us, how will we ever know anything else but good? How will we ever know to praise God and to learn how to pray to God if nothing ever bad happened to us? How would we know to call on him if we never had nothing to call on him for? So many a times God will allow these things to happen to us to produce worship and to produce praise, to produce hope, and to produce the will of man to whatever happened to him, he's able to get up from there by the power of God. So if you're online tonight and you've been going through some things and you've been wondering why this is happening, why that is happening, just know, especially in the times that you know that you're worshiping God, that you know that you're doing right by God. See, every time we go to do right, the Bible teaches us that evil is always present. Thank you, Brother Larry. Evil is always present. But just knowing that his presence is not enough. Evil is there for a reason, to try to throw us off track, to try to make us lose our relationship with God and our hope in God and our faith in God. But just know this, God is a redeemer. And God is going to allow it to be shown in Job. After all of this crying and pity party that Job had, it didn't change who he had been. He had been a upright man and a righteous man. So this pity party that Job was having, it did not change who he had been and who God would have him to be. God let him went through all of that. Said whatever he wanted to say. But when we get down to chapter 4, and we're going to come back to that next week, if you will. But when we get down to chapter 4, things start to turn around. The conversation begins to change, especially when Job's friends open their mouth and begin to talk to Job. There's an aha moment that they're going to try to get in. They say, we knew that you went all that you said that you were. We knew that things look good on the outside, but there's something wrong there somewhere now on the inside. But I thank God Almighty. I'm not going to go any further in the lesson because I want to save it till next week. But with everything that we go through, church, know that God has a purpose. And especially at the height of our worship with him, he will allow some of these things to come to prove us, are we who we say that we are. We can shout all over the church on Sunday and run up and down the aisle. But where things, where the rubber meets the road is, when trouble comes, and when trials and tribulations come in our life, will we still be the God-fearing people and the worshipers and the praisers that we so dearly love to be? So on next week, if you will, we're going to be coming back to chapter 4, and we'll see where God go from there. Probably part of chapter 5 as well. And we'll see when God will bring us out of the book of Job. But if you will just meditate on this week, you may be at the peak of your worship. And you're wondering why all of these things is going on and affecting me in my life. I thought I was doing good. Now here comes trouble. God bless tonight. Come on, if you will, just turn our mics on and say our hellos and our goodbye. Come on, Brother Aaron.
Hey, Pastor, I know we through with your lesson. Over in Job first test in chapter 1, verse 15. Now, it was two different kind of people. The Sabbateans, now they, the